we see valid use cases for all of those different approaches. And actually, we believe that the most successful companies are going to be the ones that are combining different LLMs, different service providers for different applications, and having that freedom of choice is going to be very important.
Welcome to another episode of the Chris, Rod, Max Show, where every week we speak about AI news, AI trends, and with amazing founders and people working in the AI space to really bring you the latest and greatest and innovation to the front. So I'm really, really happy to be joined here with my co-hosts Rod and Max, and also having a special guest today, Kurt Muehmel. And Kurt, really happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Chris, Rod, and Max for having me.
Amazing. And today we want to talk a little bit more about your experience around go-to-market strategies, about B2B sales. You currently work for Dataiku. We want to also understand a little bit what you guys do exactly. You are obviously a bit of a later stage company, so of course have probably made some experiences around go-to-market and B2B customers. I also want to talk a little bit about yourself, obviously your journey and your career and sort of like, how you ended up where you are right now. And then last but not least, also getting your opinion on a couple of news that we got in this week around AI trends and concepts. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I'm honored to think that my point of view may be interesting to to your audience. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Cool. So why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit more what the Dataiku actually does, and maybe also how you guys are different from perhaps similar players out in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dataiku, and the pronunciation on Dataiku is there's many schools of thought, so we never correct anyone. But with regards to Dataiku, we call ourselves the Universal AI Platform, and what we offer to our customers is the ability to control all of the different AI talents, processes, and technologies, so that they can create all of the analytics, models, and agents that their company is going to need. So, to maybe give some examples and to explain that a little bit further, I think first it's important to understand who we address in terms of our target customers. Our main customers are what are called the global 2,000 companies in the world. So the world's largest 2,000 companies. That's who we tend to focus on, meaning big organizations with significant amounts of data, of course, but also significant constraints in terms of security and privacy, regulations that they may be subject to. Our customers really cover the board in terms of industry, from banking and insurance to manufacturers to retailers. A lot of the companies that you interact with every day as a consumer, but then others that you may not, who are more in kind of the other side of the economy, more B2B part of the economy. And so what that means is that these organizations, they need a way in which to connect to all their different sources of data, but also all the different technologies that they need to use to work with that data. So everything from data storage and compute, but now especially AI services provided by the provider of their choice. But then they also need ways for their many different team members to be able to work together on that data, which means that they need to be able to enable their, let's say, most advanced users, their data engineers and their data scientists. But at the same time, let's call them business experts, the experts in their line of business who may not have otherwise data in their title. And so what that means is that Dataiku is that platform that gives them both the connectivity, the governance, but also then the multiple different interfaces. So full code, low code, and no code, so that they can work together to build things with their data. And so how are we different, right, from other players in the market? Well, there's a lot of different players in the market, and Dataiku's positioning is relatively broad, right? That's actually what we're getting at when we call ourselves the universal AI platform. So on the one hand, right, if we consider actually a lot of Dataiku's partners, so companies like Snowflake, Databricks, the major cloud providers, they also in many cases have functionality which is overlapping with Dataiku. At the same time, Dataiku does not provide that storage and compute layer, so we definitely need them. And what we add on top then is that additional functionality to enable people who are non-expert users. We take care of a lot of the lower level plumbing so that organizations and their teams can really focus on just developing the new use cases that they need, not getting different services to work together with one another. And we really offer the opportunity to, let's say, keep your options open. It's because one of the challenges that some of our customers experience is that when they start working with, for example, a single cloud provider, that becomes almost a closed ecosystem that they need to remain within. And one of Dataiku's really core philosophies is that new technologies are going to come out, new players are going to emerge, and organizations are going to want to take advantage of those new players and those new opportunities, which means that Dataiku needs to provide that connectivity and that optionality so that they can introduce those new technologies when the time is right. And we've seen that in the, let's see, what are we now, 12 going on 13 years that the Dataiku has been around, right? When we started, the main kind of data storage and compute paradigm was Hadoop. Like that was the big deal, was getting people to be able to use Hadoop without writing MapReduce by themselves. But then, of course, we saw that evolve into what became very briefly cloud-based Hadoop, but then more quickly over to object storage and distributed computing, cloud computing. And then finally, the emergence of things like, well, the data lake, data warehouse, data lakehouse providers that we have today, as well as then technologies like Kubernetes for distributing compute. And then, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about the emergence of AI as well, so we can leave that for later. But yeah, ultimately, right, that's what makes Dataiku different is that optionality, the ability to enable users of all types, and of course, the this sort of philosophy of governance that Dataiku has from really the ground up.
Got it. Thank you for that overview. So basically what I'm taking away is it's a day-to-day, everyday platform that is an interface, if you want, for multiple stakeholders, multiple users, but also more importantly, also a way to plug in new technologies for a company. And you're really going for the big fish in the market. And I suppose my next question on this is obviously, how do you build trust? And given that a lot of these bigger companies are working with, some of the tech titans like Microsoft or Oracle or any of these players, like how do you convince people to switch?
Yeah, so I think that's been a question for Dataiku from the very beginning. And so I had the opportunity, the pleasure to join Dataiku early on, and was a seller initially as well. So those were a lot of my very first discussions that I had. Literally, the first discussions my first week were with customers asking me just those questions. And now, 10 years later, that remains the same for whenever our sales team is going out and looking to establish trust with a new customer. Because indeed, they've changed over the years what they say, but nobody ever gets fired for buying. It used to be IBM, and then it was Oracle. Now it's Microsoft. That's very true, right? Those are excellent and safe choices. And so what we always do, right, is look to establish proof in that sales cycle, proof around that the technology claims that we're making are in fact valid and backed up by the product. Culturally, as a company, from a product and product marketing perspective, we're actually very conservative. We focus really on just talking concretely about what our product today does. We're not selling a future. We're not selling a dream. We're really very pragmatic to a degree that maybe is not in our interest sometimes. Maybe we need to go a little bit further sometimes, but that helps us establish that credibility. Then, of course, you're looking for other forms of proof. Other forms of proof can be from other existing customers. Now, every software vendor out there has their list of customer use cases. They've all got great logos, and they all have these huge ROI numbers, right? So that's not differentiating. But typically what we do is when necessary, we like to introduce a prospective customer to an existing customer, ideally in the same space or ideally in a similar role, so that they can hear the story directly from one of their peers. Obviously, we have the luxury of doing that being in an enterprise sales motion where we can take that time and thankfully, given the level of engagement and trust that we have with our existing customers, they're often motivated to do that, which is hugely helpful, right? There's a degree of, let's say, legitimacy that comes from that's very valid. And then finally, another third and very important form of trust is, let's say, third parties. And those third parties, I'm thinking of analyst firms. So, for example, Gartner, which they go and they do their own assessments of the market. Dataiku is very proud to be a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for the last few years consecutively. And so that's something also that we invest a lot of time in to make sure that these analyst firms have a complete understanding of who Dataiku is, what we do, so that our positioning in their analyses accurately reflects who we are. Now, of course, if we roll back 10 years to when we were just getting started, we didn't have a lot of that. So what did it take then to really go from 0 to 1? I'll be honest, a certain degree of luck, right? And in the way that luck played out for Dataiku and for myself specifically was finding somebody at a very large company. So Dataiku was founded in France, but very quickly there was interest coming from the United States from other markets. And so this is somebody from a very large pharmaceutical company in the United States. And he saw, to a certain degree, part of his role working in a large organization like this as seeking out startups and using some of his budget to go and test that software, to actually purchase the software, to give it a full test, and saw that as also a way to make the startup ecosystem a little bit more dynamic. And so we happened to come across one another. He discovered some videos that Dataiku had published. We got to talking, and that was the beginning of what then became an opportunity for him to take a closer look at the technology, test it with his teams, thereby establishing trust, and then also just for him to take that leap and to spend a bit of budget on Dataiku. And in a very, very important way, that was a first step in establishing trust with different customers, being able to say that we now have been trusted by this very recognizable company in a very regulated market. That went a long way in establishing that trust. So I think it's important for especially early companies to find those champions. They do exist, but there's an element of luck, but then there's also, of course, an element of hard work, and obviously respect their trust. Right? Trust is hard earned, but easily lost, and I think that also is reflected in the way that we, for example, run our technical support team. Right, we are maniacal about it. We really focus on providing just the best technical support, and that's another way, among many other approaches, that you continue to reinforce that trust, and you avoid, kind of wearing away at it little by little, such that at some point, that person may no longer be a supporter of yours, may no longer be somebody willing to take that call and speak on your behalf.
Definitely. I always feel like with enterprise type of business models, it's always a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Because I think it always feeds off other companies and peers and experts, but you got to get your foot into the door. And it really does sound like you guys were lucky or very sophisticated also in selling when it came to this one use case that really started to make everything a little bit easier. Really interesting. So maybe focusing a little bit on today, and obviously we talk a lot about AI, we talk a lot about the next generation of AI technologies. Obviously, agents is a big one. And tell us, what do you guys do in this field? How do you take the AI technology and integrate that into your connectivity layer?
Yeah. So, really, if we're talking about generative AI and particularly large language models, Dataiku actually we had our first integration with GPT-3 about a year before ChatGPT came out. So this wasn't yet on most people's radar. But like with a lot of technologies, there was there was some demand from some of our customers, also some curiosity on our side to say, what can we do with these new language models, these generative models, coming out of a space where, of course, most of the interest and most of the use in the platform was on traditional machine learning learning models, predictive models. And so we created a plugin for natural language text generation, connecting to GPT-3. Which saw some moderate use, but of course the interest and the level of attention fundamentally changed when ChatGPT came out. So what was our approach to that? So first and foremost, it was to talk to our customers. And many of our customers actually came to us as they came back from their winter holidays, and had their board of directors, asking them, what's our AI strategy? Because the board of directors had played it with ChatGPT between Christmas and New Year's that year. And many of our customers came to us saying, well, can you help us understand this technology? What is the potential? And so we spent some time talking to our customers, working with our customers, exploring what they think they might want to do with this and what the opportunities might be. And so it's been an evolution since that time, but a few things have remained very stable. One is that broad connectivity. And this ultimately came together in the part of our platform that we now call LLM Mesh, which is the connectivity layer to all of the different LLMs that an organization might want to use. So all of the major providers, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, but also the clouds, as well as, of course, to call them self-hosted options as well. So if an organization wants to take an open source or at least open weights model and run that themselves on their own hardware, Dataiku is also going to support that, because we see valid use cases for all of those different approaches. And actually, we believe that the most successful companies are going to be the ones that are combining different LLMs, different service providers for different applications, and having that freedom of choice is going to be very important. So on the one hand, Dataiku's approach has been to provide, once again, that kind of controlled connectivity where you can manage permissions, manage access to different technologies for different teams across the organization. And all of that is through LLM Mesh. That also includes our guardrails services. And so we have things for cost control, but also, of course, safety, content moderation built into that as well. The sort of things that, no matter what you're doing for the use case, you're going to need those no matter what. And so you don't want those developed and redeveloped for each and every use case. You want those provided as a service. Then, of course, once we get past the, let's say that connectivity layer provided by LLM Mesh, then we have the tools for building with generative AI. And so that includes things like a prompt engineering environment we call Prompt Studios, but now as well a big focus on being able to develop agents. And so agents now, and takes us into kind of a new realm where we have this new modality for building with generative AI. What used to be, kind of a almost a single format, single application type approach with chatbots. The big interest was to create enterprise chatbots. Private versions of ChatGPT was kind of that initial use case that people were seeking. Then, of course, they wanted to do document search, so there were RAG capabilities that they wanted. Obviously, Dataiku addressed those. We had our Dataiku Answers product, which is essentially that pre-built chatbot. The RAG functionality built into the platform as well. But now we see the emergence of agents. And so this is, I think, going to be the primary use case for LLMs in the enterprise going forward, because it's so flexible and so wide. And we can talk more about this, but basically in this field now, Dataiku then provides the ability to create and provide tools to agents, and then, of course, interfaces for building the agents, including both through a visual no-code interface or through a coding interface. Because once again, our customers have the need for both. They have users who prefer building in one way versus another. And so as we go forward, a lot of the focus is going to go from building a single agent to managing a workforce of agents, taking us into the field of agent orchestration, maybe call it AgentOps, which includes a lot of both, let's say, design work of designing how these different agents interact with one another, or what are the multi-agent systems and how are they calling one another. But then also a lot of monitoring, a lot of controls, and of course, a lot of governance to make sure that this new team fleet workforce of agents are operating appropriately, not going beyond what they're supposed to be doing, and doing so in a way with which is both fully compliant with IT and security requirements, but also, let's say, budget optimized. Because one of the risks with agents is if they start running on their own, they can potentially become very expensive very quickly. So those are all the considerations that really enterprises have when they're thinking about how do we go and build and use agents, because it's relatively easy for anybody to build a single agent with off the shelf tools. It's also, of course, very easy to go and license an agent from a software provider that's providing them to you. Just need the budget to do it. But the real challenge is how do we build these at scale in a way that we're getting something really differentiated out of their use, and how do we manage these over a longer period of time as the technology matures.
And Corey, you were mentioning that Dataiku has been around for a while. So you were mentioning here like big data. So these are buzzwords, so to say, that I have not heard in quite a while. And reflecting about that, so throughout the years, there have been multiple waves of adoption: big data, data science, deep learning, and so on and so forth. And Dataiku has a very strong foothold on the enterprise market. So I'm wondering, if we look at it today, what are the main use cases? If we have like a share of pie, what are enterprises doing today with Dataiku? Can you like allocate some percentages to the different disciplines?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think that what we're seeing, especially right now, is a widening of the spectrum of what customers are doing. So overall, what companies use Dataiku, what they use it for ranges from, let's call it modern or advanced analytics on the one hand, right? And so this is just a lot of data work and automation of data work, building new analytics, combining data sources that weren't able to be combined in the past, and building out analytics for use by teams across the organization. Feeding those into often business intelligence platforms, and so on. There's a lot of that kind of analytics engineering, which is happening in Dataiku. Then you have machine learning work and ML ops work being done in Dataiku, where you have data science teams that are developing and running at scale large numbers of machine learning models within Dataiku. So this is things like predictive maintenance models for some of our industrial customers, pricing models for our insurance customers, and kind of everything in between. For all of these other customers. And then finally, right, we have the generative AI use. If we just kind of put it into the three major buckets. I think if you were to look at it just in terms of value, just absolute numbers, you would see that there's probably a lot of that analytics use being done. The reason is not because that's necessarily the most important or the most valuable, but really that's a lot of the work that needs to be done in organizations today. That's a lot of what people are spending their time doing today. Then you have probably a smaller but significant percentage, which is focusing on that machine learning work and that machine learning engineering, that ML ops work. Again, that's extremely valuable work, but there's relatively, there's fewer people who are data scientists than there are analysts, so that tends to balance in that favor. And then, of course, what we have now is this massive uptake in generative AI, which in some ways is also changing the way in which those other two types of work are being done. So, for example, I didn't mention it earlier, but one of the things that Dataiku has built in is AI-powered assistance for doing the analytics and the machine learning work. We've also just introduced some new functionality called Stories, which allows you to use generative AI to automatically generate slide decks based on the data that you have available to you within Dataiku. And so I think we're going to see also ways in which these three different fields, the lines are going to begin to blur between them. And we're going to start thinking, I think, less about the particular techniques. Are you doing analytics? Are you doing generative AI? And really more about the outcomes. Are you building a new metric? Are you building a new dashboard? Or are you building an agent? And if so, what's that agent for? Well, maybe what that agent is for is actually building new dashboards, which was a very valid use case for an analytics-oriented agent. And so I think that what we see is that diversity of use cases, which in some ways the weight of each tracks to a degree the profile of the user. So there's just more people who are more analyst type than data scientist type. But that doesn't necessarily tell the story of where the value is coming from. And then ultimately, of course, just to reiterate it, kind of the overall interest of Dataiku is the fact that it's a single platform for all of those things. That's what our customers really enjoy, is that they really appreciate is that they don't have to send their teams to different tools depending on what they want to do. They have one space where they can administer all of that. Let's call it data work.
And Kurt, maybe just a follow-up question here, because oftentimes big companies not necessarily struggle with talents to build models, etc. I think one big challenge is the data quality and the data being scattered and the data being incomplete. What is your take on this? How do you guys help? And what are other maybe challenges people have in larger organizations when it comes to adopting a solution like yours?
So you're absolutely spot on that the main barrier for most either machine learning work, but now especially generative AI work, is data access and data quality. And so that's why one of Dataiku's really main strengths is the kind of the power of our, what used to be called data preparation, but now we're just calling it, kind of data and data engineering work, to feed appropriately clean data into either a machine learning model or into a generative AI system, into an agent. And I think that that's one of the things that really differentiates Dataiku from other more point solutions that focus either on just ML or, for example, on building agents, let's say. A lot of those platforms are going to have a lot of great functionality, but they're going to start by saying, well, bring us a clean data set. A lot of that work is getting to that clean data set. And so having a platform like Dataiku that goes all the way from the raw data connections through the data preparation, the data engineering work, including like Dataiku does a data catalog so that you can identify what are the appropriate data sets to use for different applications. That's really a huge part of the challenge and one of the strengths that Dataiku brings. Now, in terms of adoption, I think what you're hearing from Dataiku, or what I hope is coming across, is that it's positioned, somewhat differently and more broadly than other platforms. I think coming into most organizations have provided different cohorts of their teams based on kind of the skills and the techniques that those users are going to do. They've provided them with very good options, but distinct options for doing analytics work, then a different solution for doing machine learning. And maybe now they're exploring or making some choices around what to do for generative AI. And so Dataiku comes in and says, well, here's a single platform for doing all of those things. And there's a lot of value for that. And often it's easy to convince somebody in the right position of that value. They see, yes, I can have a single environment to do all of this. There's a lot of crossover between those different domains, so it's going to be more efficient. People can easily move from one to another. Gives us a single place to do all that governance across everything. Fantastic. But when you get to the teams, right, who have been relatively narrowly focused on doing a particular type of work in a particular tool, there's always going to be a change management challenge of convincing people to change the way that they're doing. Because from the perspective of an individual, some of them are relatively satisfied with the tooling that they have today for doing their particular job. And seeing that moving to a tool which is equivalent or even better still has a cost of change for them. If you take and move the buttons around on my screen, the buttons that I use to do my job every single day, that's a little costly, and I may not be enthusiastic about that unless I fully understand the both the overall interest, the organizational interest in doing this, but then also see the way in which this is going to be in some way beneficial to me. And so that adoption challenge often means that we have to work with the teams that are looking to roll out Dataiku to a bunch of different users. We're very attentive to where they're coming from today, what they like about what they're doing today, maybe what they don't like about what they're doing today, and then we're working very closely with those. With the people within their company who are responsible for the rollout to design a strategy to get it in their hands in a way which is going to make them not only see the interest, but really be enthusiastic about coming into a new platform. Because changing the way that you're working, changing the way that a large organization does these critical parts of their business, That's always going to be an uphill battle, but it's a necessary one, and one that I think we've gotten increasingly good at over the years as we understand what works and what doesn't in terms of bringing our customers to towards that level of adoption and success that they need to be happy Dataiku customers.
What is the most interesting lesson you have learned by rolling out for some of these largest organizations? And I thought, the listeners of the podcast might be interested to learn about that because obviously you have a lot of experience, just listening to how you stage it. So I thought it'd be good to share, what are some of the most interesting or surprising lessons that you have learned?
Yeah, I think that maybe the way of phrasing it, kind of the way that it was most surprising to me was that some people like really bad software. And there's a lot of software out there which objectively is not great. It's out of date. It's no longer current. It's lacks capabilities that are actually really valuable for end users. However, when it's the thing you've been using in your job, and sometimes it's the case that people have been using a particular type of software with a very similar interface for the last 20 years, it's really hard to change that. And so I think what you need to do is not go in with let's say with an attitude of superiority. Here I am, your savior with your modern software. This is going to make your life so much better, but with profound empathy. That's, look, I know you've been using this software for 20 years. I know you really like it. There's deep comfort associated with that. However, your organization has made the decision to change. I know that that's hard for you, but let me help you. Let me help you see the way in which you can make this shift from what you have been doing to what you will be doing in a way which is as comfortable and as not disruptive as possible. And of course, I promise you that on the other side, you're going to like it. But you really have to start with that from a position of empathy. That change is difficult for anybody, wherever they are, and especially if it's part of something, part of your day-to-day work, where it's the software that you spend 6 or 7 or 8 hours in every day. That's a real change, and I think that the most important thing is not to come in with that sense of superiority or having all the right answers. Always going into every interaction looking for what can you learn from that person, and how can you use that interaction to help them be both more comfortable and ultimately more successful.
Empathy is definitely the key. And talking about change, I mean, we are also obviously super curious how you got into where you are today. Probably also a lot of changes given your background. So perhaps you can enlighten us a little bit on that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's probably useful to provide a little bit of personal background as well. I was born in the U.S., but then moved to France shortly after I graduated college because I had met the person who's now my wife in college, and she's French. And so I found my way to France straight out of college. Did a number of different jobs, obviously taught English because that's something that every native English speaker does when they go to a non-native or a non-English speaking country. Did that for a little while. Did a number of other jobs, but then ultimately wanted to do something a little bit closer to my studies. And I studied two things in my into my undergraduate career: philosophy, but environmental sciences. And so I wanted to get back into the environmental field. And so I found my way into environmental consulting. And so I did that for about 5 years. But as with a lot of consultants, you sometimes get tired out with that business model and working model. And so I had always been attracted to technology. These were, kind of the heyday years of, when Facebook and Google were really, really exciting companies, right? I think that, the shine is a little bit off these days, but, we're talking about, everything from 2006 to 2014, right? So really the rise of these major tech companies. And certainly I was, I was excited about that. And I wanted to take part in that in some way. And I was really attracted to the model and the idea even of a startup where you have, this small group of people banding together against all odds to see if they can succeed. And maybe they won't, right? Maybe we'll fail, but that's okay. And we'll move on from that. So so actually what I did was I went to a job fair. There was a job fair called the Paris Startup Job Fair that was organized by what a now defunct English language startup blog about the French and specifically Parisian startup scene. And I handed out my resume to a bunch of other people, and one of the companies that I came across was Dataiku. And why would they hire anybody with zero relevant experience? They were eager to have somebody who spoke English without a strong French accent, because they had started having those incoming requests from companies outside of France, and especially from the United States. And I think there was just a kind of a mutual willingness to take a bet. Me taking a bet on Dataiku, and Dataiku taking a bet on me, that that has turned out to work very well for certainly for me, and I presume also for Dataiku, if they still have me after all this time. And then of course over the past decade at Dataiku, I've had the opportunity of doing a number of different things, which has been great. But it's really been very unexpected. When I was starting out at Dataiku, I started with the assumption that the company would go out of business in the next year, because that's what most startups do, and I would have needed to have been ready for that. Also, coming into the space, I did not have much ability to assess the product market fit. I wasn't a data scientist. I wasn't coming from a data background. So I didn't have a good sense of, is this going to be a successful product in the market or not? I just really liked the people that I was talking to. I felt like they were really smart, really hardworking, but also with kind of an underlying humanity. And it was just an opportunity to make the jump and make the plunge. And I thought it was going to be low stakes and probably short term, and that I would go back and get a quote unquote real job. But indeed, this has turned into much more of a real job than I had thought all that time ago.
Interesting. And talking about accents, when I prepared for this session today, I was like, okay, German kind of name, and then France-based, spent some time in London. I was like, okay, what kind of accent will we get here? And it's very much American.
Yep.
You did not get any tainted British kind of, scent on it.
It does change depending on my audience. Is sometimes right to try to do that chameleon thing and
Yeah.
match what I'm hearing. But yeah, you're absolutely right as well. The name is very German. My grandparents, my paternal grandparents were German.
Yeah.
And immigrated to the United States. It's actually since I don't really speak German, and it's often a source of confusion when I do business in Germany. They see my name, they immediately start speaking to me in German, and I have to apologize and say, sorry, the language was not transmitted genetically or
Not yet. Yeah.
right.
And super interesting philosophy. I mean, that's very, I guess, like rare these days to think about or just actually studying it. And obviously, with Rod and Max, we've been discussing quite a few ethical questions around safety, AI, disruption, etc. And I'd be super curious, like what is sort of like your thoughts on AI and also AGI is also, kind of like towards people becoming more lazy perhaps because they don't really have to think about it. Like what's your position on like critical thinking now in the age of AI?
Yeah. So I think the reason that I decided to study philosophy was because it was the hardest course that I took my freshman year. I took an intro to philosophy course because it sounded cool. It was the most difficult course that I took that year, and I said, this is good. This is a good challenge, and I feel that it'll be good to learn how to read complex texts, write with a certain level of precision and clarity as well for whatever I end up doing later. And I think that was a very good decision of 18-year-old me, 19-year-old me, because indeed I think that the ability to read, to think critically, and to write. I know for myself that the way that I think is through writing. And so, for example, when I need to really think through a problem, I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to probably write it down by hand. That's how my brain works best. It's a combination of kind of the physical act of writing, the visual act of seeing my ideas on paper. Sometimes there's sketches and things like that as I'm putting ideas together, but then also just putting the words together to form a sentence, to form a paragraph, to form, to form an entire essay about a certain topic, that structure and the critical thinking which is required, to me, that's really important. So when I'm using generative AI in my work, in my personal life, I'm using it in context where I'm a very heavy user of it, but it's in context where I'm not asking it to do those tasks for me. Maybe I'm using it as a sparring partner in some of those cases. What do you think of this? Are there other approaches? But I feel like that kernel really requires that level of thinking. So I do think there are valid concerns, for people, or I do think that there's a risk that we could lose something in terms of that critical thinking coming from reading and writing if everything that we're doing is being first summarized by a large language model, and then we're just writing out bullet points and it's expanding them. I feel that there could be something which is missing there. At the same time, I think it's great to have access to these tools which can help you understand philosophy and complex documents. A lot of these texts are impenetrable. Actually, in my current use, when I'm listening to a philosophy podcast, I'll ask a model to explain to me what are these ideas, and we can have a back and forth and a question of is this related to this? Is this related to that? Did these two thinkers work together? What if I think about it this way? And that can actually be extremely productive, right? And so I think that I'm very much uniquely or solely positive on the technology, but I see a lot of great benefit to this technology as well, as it applies to critical thinking, so long as people understand and use it in a way which is, as in, let's say, an augmentation and not a replacement for their thinking. So we'll see how this plays out. I think that's one of the main challenges that not just any one company or any one individual, but society in general is facing, is the question of how are we going to adopt this technology in a way which is going to, let's say, reinforce and strengthen our not only our businesses but our education, the way in which we operate as a society, because truly, the potential for this technology is needs to be considered at that societal level as well, right? We've been talking in the first part of this discussion a lot about the applications in enterprise, and obviously that's going to be a major thing. Enterprise is, of course, a major structuring entity within society today. That's where a lot of people go to work with other people, to interact with other people. It provides a lot of the the structure that other institutions may have provided in the past. But I think that especially as we get towards AGI, these questions are going to become, these very fundamental questions of how do we interact with one another? How do we, what do we expect from both our population, and what do we expect from our employment? Do we expect to be working, 40 hours a week every day, or do we expect something else? These are really fundamental questions, which I think this technology is so broadly applicable, right? It's a general purpose technology, and transformative, that we're going to have to address these questions as a society. And what I'm worried about, right, is that societal level discussions today don't seem to be at their highest and most sophisticated level across different governments, across different populations, and so I think it's a very volatile time that we're coming into, between what is the role of the nation state, what is the role of the citizen, and how do they interact with things like private enterprise, all of this which is going to be increasingly mediated and influenced by increasingly powerful artificial intelligence technologies. It's a fascinating time to be alive, right? But it's I think it's one of the most transformative, it's going to be one of the most transformative decades in arguably the history of a very long time, especially because it's going to be happening so quickly. Previous major transitions, previous industrial revolutions, previous political revolutions, these were often building up and taking place over decades, over centuries in some places, in some cases. Whereas this, of course, is really a wave that's hitting us and is going to be breaking over a matter of a few years. And so I think there's a lot of relevant concern, but also a need for very serious thinking from every corner of society, from government to private enterprise to even religion.
Honestly speaking, I feel like we could just do another separate philosophy podcast on some of these fundamental questions and really debate it out. But maybe in the interest of time, I also want to get your opinion on this one news piece from the New York Times. And it's really talking about the startup scene now changing, Silicon Valley is sort of like taking another stint. And I think the core of the article is really about this concept around tiny teams. Some of the companies that have been mentioned, like Gamma, which is also like AI for presentations, Anysphere or 11 Labs, that are able to achieve quite remarkable ARR and annual revenue with really small teams, where previously you would probably need like 200, 300, 400 people, ops people, just to like sort of like, army out to talk to all these enterprises and like try to convince them to like get onto the platform. What is your take on this? And what do you think? How is this going to change or shape the startup field and also maybe the VC field, given your opinion and experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw that article, and it's, I mean, in a way, it makes me so jealous that that this technology wasn't around when we were a 20-person startup, because we discussed the challenges of adopting a technology like Dataiku in a large enterprise, and so a large enterprise, by contrast, necessarily is slow moving. There's a lot of pieces to change. Now, you take that and you flip it on its head, and you look at a 10, 20, 30, 40-person company. Speaking from experience here, they have essentially no employees. They have no processes that need to be changed. Everything can be pivoted on a dime. So the opportunity for adoption of a transformative technology is just massive within these startups. And I think that that's where you get a glimpse of what the future is going to look like, of what new economic models could look like, where instead of doing what I was doing when I was kind of fulfilling the role of a BDR and account executive in Dataiku, I was writing these little macros on my Mac to go and scrape the web of attendees of a conference and then look them up on LinkedIn and then automate a message and all of that. If I would have been able to do that with an agent now today, it would have been faster, would have been more effective, it could have been more repeatable than what I was doing in the past. And so I think that we're seeing in these startups that are really AI first, that are building all of their processes with the assumption or with the foundational question of how can I automate this? How can I use AI to do this for me? And you're assuming from the get-go that there is that this should not be a human task. And the question is, what is necessarily a human task, right? We assume everything should be AI, and the exception would be what is a human task rather than the other way around. I think that this is a glimpse of what future enterprise is going to look like in a lot of fields. So, there's going to be some exceptions, obviously, human services, things like that, nursing, haircuts, dentistry, right? All of these things are, for now, going to require a human touch, literally. But for a lot of these things, work which is primarily done from behind a computer, we're at a stage now where any new company starting up should assume that everything should be AI powered, right? And the role of the human is overseeing and in managing and developing those AI capabilities. And I think that we're going to see fundamental changes in the way that leads to different valuations for companies. I think that, like many powerful technologies, this is going to widen the gap between the successful and the less successful, both in terms of companies, but also in terms of individuals, because it is a giant lever that allows you to do more with the capital that you have. It means things are going to move faster. So I think that the path to success may be narrower for certain companies. There's going to be more competition as well as more people get access to this. If I'm looking at something that I think might be hopeful, I hope that it widens the spectrum of people who can potentially participate in this startup economy, not just people who are based in a few hubs around the world, not just people with the most advanced computer science degrees, but to smart people, motivated people, but who may live elsewhere or may not have the opportunity to have that training. But it's going to be extremely competitive. but with an opportunity of potentially extremely high valuations, massive revenue from a very low starting point, leading to company valuations multiples which far exceed anything that we've seen to date.
Definitely. And most likely there's also going to be a lot of more startups coming to market. So that's good for competition and innovation. But this has been super, super interesting. I guess my final question to you would be, do you have any final thoughts for the audience when they think about building for B2B, maybe getting into philosophy and AI before we
Yeah.
wrap up?
Yeah, no. So I think in terms of building for B2B, I think that it's important to come into the B2B market with the right expectations about how large organizations work. You will get frustrated. You will not be successful if you are assuming that these are organizations that can move quickly, that can take shortcuts when it comes to things like security. You need to look at those security questionnaires sent by their security team, not as just a burden, but as one of the critical pathways that you need to get to success, which means that you need to engineer your product in a way that anticipates those. That's really key to getting deep into these big companies and moving out of just kind of the showy POC software that they can use off to the side on a little bit of temporary use cases, and becoming something really critical. And so I think that there's a need to to really respect those requirements if you hope to be successful in the long term in that market. And so I think that but at the same time, working B2B, I find to be profoundly interesting because coming back to philosophy, it gives me an opportunity to work with all these different companies across all of these different sectors, right? All these different industries, given that at least in the case of Dataiku, we're positioned cross industry, and really work with them on their most challenging problems. And I think you see there really where the rubber hits the road in terms of how private enterprise uses technology to achieve some business outcome in a geopolitical context, while expecting the human beings who are its employees to do some job. And it's really this convergence of all of these major themes of our times, which is truly fascinating to witness and to be a part of.
Great. I learned a lot today. I think empathy, you talked about empathy being very important, being humble, really taking the other side very seriously. And also you talked about, which I think is your passion, to really get to know business problems and companies and what's really top of mind of their agenda. So I really, really enjoyed this session today. Thank you so much for joining us. We will link your contacts into the show notes. And yeah, for the audience, thank you so much for listening in. If you like what you've heard today, please subscribe, like, and sign up to our newsletter. And we will see you guys next week.